All right, next up on the agenda, Dan and Tara. You want to sit here? You guys can pick your seats here. Stay here. All right.
I'm gonna move so I can see the PowerPoint.
All right, and I'm going to move out of here because the light's going to come on real quick. And this is our Budget and Audit Committee proposals. Dan and Tara will do our presentations. Thank you. Here we go.
Good morning. Can everyone on the phone hear me okay? Can you hear me on the phone?
This is Brian. I can hear you.
Great.
This is Ethan. I can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, good morning. As you know, we are in the process of recruiting a CFO. So absent that, I will be presenting the overview of the budget this morning. Tiffany Lynch is on the phone, so I will invite her as well as members of the staff that are here to jump in to answer some of your more detailed questions, and also to feel free to jump in and correct me if I say anything incorrect. But this is a pretty high-level overview. The detailed budget is in your materials. I'll go over this. Happy to answer any questions on the overview as well as any of the detailed questions. I also think, remember, this is the first reading of the budget. It will come before you for action in September. Budget and Audit will meet again in August. So this is a really good opportunity to give further direction, ask questions. There's more work that can be done if you want it. And so this is a good opportunity to do that, because ideally we do want to be able to pass a budget that everyone feels good about in September. So as you probably know, our budget is divided into 5 different funds, which I will dive into a little bit deeper as we go on. But at a high level, there's the general fund, which is essentially our operating fund. It's made up of 31 cost centers and is about $21.5 million. We also have a capital budget at about $500,000. The CLE fund, which is comprised of 2 cost centers, which is CLE and desk books, and that's a $2 million fund. We also have the client protection fund and the sections fund, which is made up of the 29 section cost centers. Okay, so starting with the general fund. As I mentioned, it's comprised of 31 cost centers that support all of our regulatory functions and the vast majority of our activities that serve the members and the public. When you look at the detailed cost centers, this is largely all part of the general fund. The primary source of revenue to the general fund is license fees. They make up 78% of revenue. Admissions is the second highest source of revenue at 7%. The general fund is also made up of general fund reserves, which are separated into the operating reserve, $1.5 million. This is essentially our emergency rainy day fund, and the board has set that amount at $1.5 million. In addition, we have a facilities reserve at $550,000. This is meant to be built up when we are contemplating a move or for refurbishment of existing office space. And it is also required to have a minimum of $200,000. In addition, we have the unrestricted reserves. As of the end of June, this is at $2.7 million, and this is all of the undesignated money and where any net income or loss is taken each year. The operating and the facilities are both board designated, and the total amount of general fund reserves per the board should not fall below $2 million. As you can see in the FY20 budget, we are projecting a net loss of $560,920. That would put our reserves at $3.1 million, which is above the $2 million that's required. Okay, you cannot see that very well, but it's in your materials, I believe, so hopefully you can blow it up. This pie chart is designed to demonstrate where the money goes at a high level. One thing that I want to point out is that these categories do not neatly match up to the cost centers. We've tried to slice it in a way that makes sense functionally, and some of these slices may represent one cost center and some are comprised of more. And if you have questions about what goes into each slice, I'd be happy to answer those. But as you can see, those two big chunks, those are the discipline system and the licensing and admission service, which is where the largest percentage of our budget goes. Alec?
Yeah, I was just going to share with the governors on page 137 of your materials. You will find that pie.
Thank you. Okay. At this point, I want to refer you to page 138 of your materials. Yeah. Sure.
On the pie chart, maybe I misheard you, but you said that the largest part of the budget was licensing and admission?
Well,
services?
the two largest parts are the discipline system, which is 31%, and the licensing and admission, which is 19%.
Okay, I did mishear that. Thank you.
Tara, I have a question and you may not know, but maybe Dan does. I've always wondered why the discipline is so incredibly high. Does anybody know?
I think, Doug, do you want to speak to that? It's definitely our largest department.
I wouldn't say it's incredibly high. I'd say it's exactly where it needs to be in terms of the services delivered and the cost of doing the work that's been delegated.
Well, I understand that, Doug, but that you would feel that way. But I guess I'm wondering, and maybe you have the statistics that you could share at some point. What does it cost per prosecution, per investigation? Do we have that information? And I know that counties can usually provide breakdowns on what it costs per, to handle prosecutions or land use violations or whatever. I'm just wondering, do we have those statistics available?
I don't have them at hand, but they could be developed.
Okay. I'd like to ask that those be developed and shared with the Board of Governors prior to the next budget meeting to discuss it. That would be helpful for me. Thank you.
Doug, it might help the board to... Well, just... it's fine. Otherwise, you got to backtrack.
And I'm not opposing that, Carla, but I want to make sure we know what is entailed in developing what you're asked for, just making sure it's very tight, very detailed, so we don't absorb a huge amount of time and expense trying to gather something that we don't know what the staff's getting. So what is it that you're asking for? And do we know, then Doug, do we know what it's going to cost to develop that?
We certainly don't know what it's going to cost, but we know it'll take a lot of time.
Right. And we have a crunch on our staff. This is part of my concern here.
So if we were to ask for what it costs per average, the average cost for each investigation and prosecution, that would be hard to put those numbers together. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying it would be hard. I'm just saying it would take time to figure out how to accurately reflect the request.
All right, and if that's what you're asking, just before we get too deep in the weeds here, you're asking for the breakdown of what it would cost for per prosecution.
Right, whether it's an investigation, and no matter how that ends in something other than referral on to a hearing, and then what it costs for the ones that go on to a hearing. All
right, so if Doug, maybe if we could get an idea, and you can't do this now, of what maybe a projection on what that's going to cost in terms of staff time, and then we could before we jump down that road, let's make sure this isn't some huge endeavor that takes a staff person away from some other project, but we'll come back and talk about it, Carla. Is that okay for now?
Well, sure. The only thing that I'm wondering is, if we find, how are we going to proceed then? Is Doug going to
Sure,
tell
they-
us it's going to take 100 hours and that's really cost prohibitive, or how do we communicate from this point forward to get that information?
Doug can share the information with me, and I'll make sure, or Tara, and we will make sure everybody has the information. Yeah.
I have Alex,
Okay.
Paul, and Felix, but let me ask Doug a couple of questions that might help the board understand how that's budgeted. How many employees, attorneys, and support staff are within that budget? In discipline.
The discipline piece of the pie includes both investigation and prosecution side. That's the Office of Disciplinary Counsel and the adjudicative functions.
Right, I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to...
38 staff in the Office of Disciplinary Counsel.
And that includes attorneys?
Yeah.
So, keep in mind, Discipline's a law firm, in a way. It's an in-house law firm. And so we have to pay all those attorneys and paralegals and such as any other law firm would. And, being experienced lawyers, they make a fair chunk of change. All that money also is what is used to support the administrative process. We have hearing examiners. We have the whole rigmarole that goes into the entire process. Also, within that is they are allocated their share of the enterprise overhead. So as Doug has often said, and I think it's pretty well said, they sort of contract with WSBA for a lot of services. So within that budget is also their share of HR and diversity, and they're also hit with IT, and it's a full, and because they're also the largest department, like 31 people, that's also how we allocate our rent. So they also pay a very large share of the rent. So, when you talk about 31 million or 31% of the budget for discipline, it's not just discipline, it's all the rest of it. It does beg the interesting question, though, and I'm not saying either way, of what it really costs to deliver discipline. Is it really that number, or is that number also supporting all of these other programs, which I think is probably the more interesting macro question to have. Because we talk about, discipline is a third of our budget. Well, it is, and that's properly allocated that way. But there are other things that is being budgeted toward that. So with that, does that help refine your question? Because the other thing to keep in mind too, it's really hard to say how many prosecutions, because so many of these are handled with a letter and a diversion that never even take any staff time. And then you might have one. I was a witness in one, and it went on for 3 years. So
no, that's helpful, and this question is not intended to imply a criticism, Doug, just so you're clear and so everyone else is clear. It's just that I get asked questions now that I'm on the Board of Governors about why does it cost so much, and I don't have an answer. And since I feel like in my fiduciary capacity I should have an answer, I'd like to have information so that I can say, well, that's because it costs $100,000 per investigation or $200,000 per prosecution or whatever the numbers are, and I just can't answer that right now. So I just thought it would be helpful for me to know. And then when I'm asked why is it almost a third of our budget, I can say, well, it's because X. So, but that helps, Dan. Yeah, that does help in my understanding of at this point.
So Tara's going to be the point.
Well, I wanted to say one more thing, and I think Alec and PJ both wanted to say something, is that, and Paul, another thing that would be helpful, I think, when you're answering questions, I believe it was in the May board book, was the annual discipline report, and it really dives into how much work is running through the organization and how it breaks down and what type and all of that. So there's a wealth of information in there, and I'd invite you to reflect back on it, and that might be helpful as you're talking to constituents. Alec?
Yeah, I guess I would suggest that maybe those are the places to start to actually put together the report for people to go through, including, because I was looking at our budget comparison reports as well. And I think we may want to set aside some time to walk through all of that information. And so while it's there, it's in different places. But if we could put together the various reports that are relevant to that, I think that would be helpful.
Paul?
And I was just going to highlight what you had mentioned, that there is this annual disciplinary report. I think it will be useful as a regular process, which I think is part of the cycle, that we get an overview of what the discipline side of the house has been up to. Again, this is a sort of a non-voluntary function. This is a mandatory function. It is the function that the Supreme Court is most, I think, keenly sensitive about and aware of. Folks who've been around a long time might recall that maybe 25 years ago, the discipline backlog was some 2,000 cases or something. It was just incredible. There was a huge backlog. A gentleman that I'd worked with at the Securities and Exchange Commission, Barry Altoff, came in, and he increased the budget, 4X or something, to deal with that backlog. Is that roughly accurate?
Yeah, very significantly at that time. That's when I came in to the Office of Disciplinary Counsel.
Right. So this is one of those areas where you don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish, because there's a lot we don't see. There's a lot of cases that don't show up, in the bar magazine. There's a lot of work that goes on, and a staff of 35, is probably what's required. What is it?
38, right?
38
Yep.
is probably, what's required to handle this vital function. So, but it's always, and I think if you have that disciplinary report and you have the number of known cases, and then if we could separately have the number of cases that were dealt with that didn't arise to any public notification, then you can almost kind of back into unit economics of what each, type of matter is roughly costing, I think.
Right, and all of that information, as has been pointed out, is in the annual discipline report, which is publicly available. And at a very blunt level, anyone could take those numbers and do some division.
Right, so it shouldn't take a lot of time, and I would hope it doesn't take a lot of time to kind of bring those up to the surface.
Well, that would be helpful if we knew how many attorneys there were, how many staff, and the salary range for each of them, too, because that's, I'm assuming, part of what we'd have to factor in, and I don't have that information. You of course, do. So,
I think PJ has probably a partial response to that point.
Remember from the retreat that Budget and Audit is going to go through what we call a deep dive exercise this coming year, and we'll be going through all of this. So certainly everybody on Budget and Audit is going to get steeped in that detail, and anybody else who wants to get steeped in that detail, of course, can come to Budget and Audit and participate in the adventure.
All right, I'm going to keep moving if that's okay. So again, I'll refer you to page 138 in your materials, which will give you a sense of how the FY20 draft budget compares to our current budget, so you can understand why it is that we're projecting a loss and what some of the differences are in expenses. Again, one thing that I continue to hear, there was some discussion at the structures work group about deficit spending. And so I wanted to take a minute to talk about the way that we use the reserves. This is a large organization. From time to sometimes we often beat our budget. We budget very conservatively. As you can see, we are required to have at least $2 million in reserves, but as of the end of FY19, we expect we will have almost $3.7 million. So if the Board of Governors chooses to adopt a deficit budget, as they have chosen to do in the past, it is not necessarily out of fiscal irresponsibility. It's an intentional choice, recognizing that those reserves have gotten higher than are required, and that given the revenue that we have, that we anticipate, and the expenses that we anticipate, that you can choose to adopt a budget that looks like this. You could also give direction that you don't want to adopt a budget that looks like this. But I just wanted to point out that part of the reason that we have reserves is to help accommodate these fluctuations. And again, that we do budget conservatively, and we often beat the budget by a fair amount. So again, page 138 will walk you through what some of the changes are, and I'll just go through them quickly. And this sheet is capturing changes of $20,000 or greater. When you go through the individual cost center budgets, they also will show you what we budgeted for FY19 as well as what we're anticipating budgeting for FY20, so you can see the more micro changes. Based on, so the big changes are that we expect a revenue increase of $422,000 based on license fees. $100,000 increase based on admission application fees and our projections there. Relatedly, an additional $40,000 for Pro Hoc Vice revenues. $30,000 from interest income, and then it's basically blocked out by the fact that we eliminated our investments and put them into a money market account. So that's basically a net zero. And then there are a variety of other smaller revenue changes that amount to $34,000, which brings us to a total increase in revenue of just about $600,000. In terms of expenses, we have increased the budget line for legal fees to $200,000, just projecting that we may continue to have increased legal fees in the coming year. Salaries are increasing by about $200,000. That's based on the 3% market salary pool, but it's also reduced because $191,000 is certainly not 3% of our salaries, but based on savings from hiring efficiencies. Our rent will be increasing by $150,000. We are anticipating an increase to the cost for board meetings and the retreat by about $108,000. That's based on extending the meetings, some location changes, and adding 2 meetings. As we talked about yesterday during my executive director report, we're increasing our insurance premiums by $100,000. We are projecting increased costs for temporary employees up to $75,000. We are also projecting spending $65,000 on the recruitment for the executive director. We have an increase in our capital labor expenses this year up to $47,000. Retirement costs we are projecting to increase. And overall, that brings our increased expenses to just over $1 million. Yep. PJ.
On the human resources direct expenses, before we actually contract for that, can we talk about it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
At budget and audit?
Yeah.
Okay. I will make a note. Other questions?
That's budgeted to be spent next fiscal year.
Yes.
Let's not
You used to have more presentations, Tara?
A little bit more.
Okay. I just have a question when you get to the end.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to the capital budget. The purpose of the capital budget is to identify projects that are going to cost a certain amount of money up front, but that they're going to be depreciated over time. And we want to realize that over time. In order to be included in the capital budget, it has to meet our threshold for capitalization, which is over $2,500. There is a significant increase in the capital budget this year. We have, as you know, we develop a lot of our applications in-house, and we have a number of applications that need significant upgrades. However, I think what's interesting to note is that this budget fluctuates quite a bit over time. I spoke to Tiffany yesterday, and although in FY19 the budget was only $242,000, in FY18 it was much closer to, I can't remember what the exact, I think it was $445,000. So it fluctuates quite a bit over time depending on what projects we have in the queue. Okay. The next fund is the CLE fund. As I mentioned before, the CLE fund is comprised of both our CLE programming as well as desk books. The goal of the CLE fund is to be self-sustaining. It does not pull on license fees at all. We generally aim to break even with excess revenues from some years covering losses in other years and also allowing us to make investments in new technology. For FY20, we're essentially projecting a break-even budget. The difference between the FY19 budget is due to increased costs for the production of desk books and projected decreased revenue for CLE seminars. That decrease in revenue was as an anticipated result of our revised revenue sharing agreement with sections. Client Protection Fund. As trustees of the fund, I think you are all pretty familiar with this, but this is a fund that makes gifts to compensate individuals who have been victimized by lawyer dishonesty. As you can see, the fund has been growing healthily. The budget is largely the same. There's a slightly decreased expense due to a light reduction in the FTE count that we've allocated to this budget. And section funds. So the bar graph represents the collective net income of loss over all 29 sections carried over from year to year. Again, you can see that the sections have a fairly healthy fund balance. It had been growing. There was some encouragement over recent years to not grow too much, and so you can see that there's been a slight trend down, but overall those reserves have stayed quite healthy. And I also want to note that the section budgets were not due until mid-July, and so the FY20 draft budget that you're looking at today does not reflect the section budgets, and you will see those in September. So again, actually, the Budget and Audit Committee, I guess, is meeting in August and also in September, so we'll be looking at revised drafts of the budget, and again, it'll come back to you at your September meeting for hopefully approval. I want to just take a quick pause and see if Tiffany wants to add or correct anything.
Nope, I think it is great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Bill, you had a question?
Questions? I have one, but I'm holding it.
I have a question.
Yes, Carla.
The projected increase, Tara or Dan, in temporary employees, I'm just wondering why.
Mm-hmm. Tiffany, is that something you can speak to?
Sure. So it's very specific. Most of our temp salaries are for cyclical needs, such as the licensing season. But we called out specific ones that are new this year. For the Office of Disciplinary Counsel, it's actually a scanning project for all of our records that's been going on for many years, and we're trying to catch up and get that resolved. And I think Doug can speak to that a little bit more if you want more detail. Under diversity, it's actually for an analyst to do some data gathering, and I think maybe Felix could talk a little bit about that as well if you want more detail. MCLE is for an analyst during the licensing season that's needed, and COE projects, I believe, is consistent with timing of the fall season and getting products turned over into, seminar recordings into products.
I would actually appreciate knowing a little bit more about that, those various categories.
Some of that I can pull together and provide. The only one that's different is really more of the project related to trying to get a lot of the records and things in ODC to be kind of integrated. They've already been on the path of getting everything to be paperless, and so part of the process there is trying to move some things along so that we can move some of the budget line from storage and other things to get things to be more electronically accessed. So it's going to actually reduce costs in one area over time, which is for what we're paying for storage, and then just kind of make us more efficient. That's the biggest change. Other things that were called out are things that we do every year. MCLE and supporting other efforts that are seasonal, as Tiffany was saying, are things we do every year. The biggest change is ODC, but I can get those things to you separately.
There was a mention by Tiffany of an analyst for diversity. What was that about?
There is some work being done to look at some analytics. So some of the things that we're trying to do now is it looks to how we optimize some of the things we can start to quantify as it relates to the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's going to be more on an analytical side. We do a lot of outreach, but then we wanted to start to be able to look kind of at some ways to be able to quantify exactly how we're having an impact. And that is not something for which we have a specific number. We have some allocations, but that isn't something I've dug into yet specifically, other than just saying part of what we are anticipating is some other needs there. We also have people that we pull in for things like a work study and other things for which there are some other underlying costs, but that is not a significant. That's not a significant item.
Thank you.
Governors, questions? Yes, Chris.
Thank you. I see two policy decisions that are essentially incorporated in this budget. One is to increase the number of meetings of the Board of Governors and apparently travel to more expensive locations for the Board of Governors. And certainly in the interest of transparency, I think those are discussions that should take place in public so that our members can be aware of them. The second policy decision is the $50,000 for a supplemental audit. When we talk about increasing the Board of Governors cost center by $40,000 to essentially add more money to the WLI, it seems to me that we might take those funds from the more expensive locations or the additional Board of Governor meetings or the supplemental audit, because I haven't heard a compelling argument at this level for any of those expenditures.
The supplemental audit is on the agenda to be discussed coming up in probably about 2 minutes. So it is carved out, and you guys will have a chance to vote on whether you want to implement it.
All right. Other questions? Looking around the room. PJ.
I agree with one of Chris's comments. I would be in favor of looking at reducing the cost of meetings that are associated with going to more expensive venues. Personally, I would favor having all of the BOG meetings at our Seattle facility. That's the least expensive place to go. We don't get a lot of participation from members when we go to Yakima or Vancouver or the Tri-Cities.
Objection.
Join.
We've noted our objection. Go ahead.
And I think that we do much better in terms of member communication and engagement with the outreach tour that has been undertaken. I think it's going to be a great success. I think when the president and the executive director and the affected governors go out into the communities, we meet with people. They have a chance to talk to us and tell us what their concerns are. The president has an opportunity to discuss those concerns and engage with the members, as does the executive director and the affected governor. And that's a lot less expensive than moving this entire band all over the state.
All right. Okay. Kim and then Kyle.
Is this on?
And Alec.
Yes. PJ, I respectfully want to disagree with that. The outreach tour, or whatever it's being called, in my district was not well received. I think that going to the different areas of the state, certainly we may not get a lot of people, but we have the local heroes in their local area presentation. I think that's significant. And it's also the appearance, because the Board of Governors is coming to their place of business where they live, and I think that shows that we're interested in all areas of the state, and we're willing to include all areas of the state. And if they want to come down, great. But I think it's important that we make a presence all over the state, and we have received several complaints about it being too Seattle-centric. And I think to go back to have all our meetings in Seattle is going to exacerbate that problem and that feeling of disconnection. So I think going out to the different localities, different areas of the state is significant. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Kyle.
And Kim just stated what I was going to say as well. The listening tour is great. I participated in the Southwest Washington, but I didn't go to Spokane, and I didn't go to Whatcom County, and I didn't go to Walla Walla or anywhere else. And part of the benefit of going out and having these is to bring you all into the communities. And maybe it's our fault. Maybe we need to better market when we come into town cities, not Seattle, and make more of a show. Because I think maybe if we did that a little bit more, we might get a better response and participation from the local communities. But having you all out, Vancouver last year was important to me. It was important to our community, and I'd like to see that continue.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm going to try to get this right. I think it's Alec, Paul, and Russell. Are you in the queue, Paul?
No, but I kind of like being in it now.
All right, you're in the queue. All right, I know. I could see you were sending me that message that I want in the queue, but I won't raise my hand. Will you do this? Okay, so Alec,
Hey, Bill.
Paul, Russell, and then Brian.
Yes.
You're in the queue as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so two observations. One, we started talking about temporaries. What I would like to see, one, come to budget and audit, but then to come back here, is the context of our use of temporary employees. And what's our policy and what's our history been? So that we're not just looking at this year, but also looking at, how and when we use temporaries. And talking about that in the context of special projects where it would not be appropriate to hire somebody as a FTE only to then get rid of them because the project was done. So I'd just like to make sure we put temporaries in a context and also how it's applied as we talk and look at the use of temporary employees and how that's being proposed to be used in this budget. The second thing, so PJ, I've said this to you a few times, so now I'm going to say it to all of the members of the board. Our meetings could be the meeting plus. And so as opposed to saying, no, we don't go out, actually structure the meeting where the first part of the meeting is, in fact, the listening tour for the community. Because there are some people who may not want to come and watch a full BOG meeting and, kind of sit and watch us do our thing, but we'd be very interested if there was a time certain that they could just come to express a number of issues that they may have. And so it's not this or that. It can be this plus in a very smart way. And then when we're talking about, Kyle, when we're talking about how we market that, we actually market that with, at the beginning of this, is a listening tour or a listening session that we want to have with our members, which is really then their meeting, meaning their agenda, and then people are aware of what the BOG meeting may be, and they may not choose to come to that, but that's okay.
All right. Thanks, Alec. And so we're next. We have Russ. So here's the queue: Russell, Brian, Paul, and Rajiv has added himself to the queue. We may strike him, but we'll see. I know. Now I know how you interpret the word strike, Carla. Yeah, okay. That's helpful.
I'll defend you, Bill.
All right, good. Russell.
I just wanted to add that I think it is extremely important to be connected with the whole state. It would be easier for me if we always met in Seattle. I live relatively close. It would be easier for a lot of us who live in kind of the I-5 corridor, Puget Sound region. But with the criticism of being Seattle-centric, and me being from a city that is very proud to not be Seattle, I think it's important that we do connect with local areas. I think people in their right mind don't really want to come to a full board meeting. So one thing we could do is have a connection with local bar associations maybe after our meeting. We have the entire Board of Governors here in the Tri-Cities. We could have a event after our board meeting with the local bar association here, and we could do that in Yakima, in Vancouver. And I think in Vancouver we had a lot of participation from local attorneys. That, to me, is what, if I were wanting to see what the Board of Governors was up to, I wouldn't want to come sit in a meeting like this. So it's not surprising to me that we don't have a lot of participation at these meetings. What I think we would have a lot of interest in is coming to meet the Board of Governors to discuss informally their concerns and have like an open dialogue. And I think that happens best if we go to them versus asking all them to come to us.
I concede abject defeat.
All right, Brian.
Hi. My question is about the the Northwest Lawyer magazine. I was looking at that page, and I forgot what page it was on now. But interestingly, the costs of printing and copying almost match the projected deficit for fiscal 2020 budget. And I'm wondering if there's been given any thought to go into a total digital version of the Northwest Lawyer in an effort to make that publication break even. That's my question.
Hi, Brian. This is Sarah. I think that the Budget and Audit has and is interested in deeply looking at Northwest Lawyer magazine. I think if you're looking at one particular cost or revenue center, it's probably not giving you the entire picture. In August, we're going to look at that. And also our plan to be a break-even magazine starting next year and rolling on. Last year, the sum total deficit for Northwest Lawyer magazine was about $17,000. And because people often bring up this idea, if we stop printing, there's a substantial savings. But what I'll also say is that our advertiser has made a commitment. We're looking at them that we should be cost print neutral. Our direct cost should be neutral. If we go online, the prices that we can charge for any sort of advertising they expect would be a tenth or maybe even less of what we get from a magazine that goes to all licensed legal practitioners in the state, and you won't even begin to come close to the indirect costs of producing that magazine. So there's a lot that goes into it, but you are right. Overall, we're looking at being a revenue expense neutral publication.
Thanks, Sarah. Anything else, Brian?
No, that's all I had. Thank you very much.
Okay, and then before I go to Paul, I'm going to say just in regards to the magazine, if we don't think people read that thing, we're wrong. I had actually 2 calls from the Northern Marianas Islands because I put my phone number in the president's column from one of our members out in the Pacific who greatly appreciated getting that magazine and the connection that he has to our bar as a result of being able to read that. So it does matter. All right, Paul, almost a third-year Governor Swigel.
Thank you, President Pickett. PJ, I also had concerns about the amount that the board spends getting around the state and meeting, and sort of in the past sort of likened it to a big rock show, that travels around at great expense. One, I think we've done it seems like we've done a little bit better job managing those expenses. I mean, sometimes it's just been a huge caravan. I've been a little concerned about that, but I think lately these meetings have been more right-sized, and I've been happy to see that. I do get a little uncomfortable when it's at a really lavish place myself for the very same reasons, and I think this is the right level of lavish, I think. Mid-lavish, mid-market lavish. I think it is, as Alex and Russell both emphasized, I think it is incredibly important for the strength of the Bar Association to have a statewide presence. I hear a lot of folks say, who want to get rid of the bar, bifurcate the bar. It's like, we have local bar associations. Well, it completely misses the point that the power of a statewide bar association is vastly greater than just local bar associations with their own parochial interests. I really like the ideas that both Alec and Russell put forward, and they were the same ones that I was going to sort of put forward. We have a really hard time scheduling, we're getting better at it now under this OPMA, scheduling so that we know when certain things are going to happen, and allowing for members in the public to come at a time certain when we are for sure going to listen to their views, take their feedback, take their ideas in a way that makes them feel engaged. I think that is a very good idea. And then I really like the idea of having an event after where we invite all of the lawyers, through the local bar associations to come and mingle and have some free appetizers. I know we can't pay for alcohol, but we can have an event where it's just, a tradition where you can come and interact with the board and with the leadership and with the staff and feel connected to the bar. So I really think it's important to get around the state. I like the idea of managing costs, and I really like the ideas of ensuring the highest value for the local communities and professionals of these fairly expensive trips.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Quick comment. Yes, please. You're jumping the queue, and that's all right.
Sorry, I just quick comment. The east and west side of the member engagement committee, Dan and I are proposing, we're talking about a little sort of picnic kind of idea to involve other members when we go to the different regions.
Good. Fantastic.
Sure.
All right. Again, Paul, I agree with everything you said, except I disagree. I'm a big supporter of lavishness. So, and we will never see eye to eye on that. So,
I am mid-market lavish.
All right. Rajiv, you're up next.
Thank you. I kind of feel like some of this is my fault. It's a good dialogue to have, but I wrote a letter to Budget and Audit Committee earlier this year, and I said, look, I'm going to be present next year. These are my ideas. These are my concerns about transparency. These are my concerns about budget. This is what I want to see clarified, and this is what I think can best help me facilitate the work of you. And this is the bottom line of it. And I'm kind of channeling President Pickett a little bit here. I'll never have that level of verbosity, but we are better together. We are better together. And then when I say we are better together and we are better united and we are better through love, that comes through trust, relationships, and service. But it doesn't mean we are better together, we're doing it this way, you all come along with us. You 41,000 members come along with us. It has to be a two-way street. People have to feel that we're invested in them. The Board of Governors has been to Blaine, Washington, for goodness sake. That's kind of meaningful for the three of us that are out there, which is pretty exciting. But in this electronic age, maybe I'm a bit of a Luddite, maybe I'm a bit of a fuddy-duddy. I'm one of those people who rails against e-filing, because even though it lowers all the transactional costs, it really dehumanizes the process. I'm one of those people who rails against judges doing telephone hearings with prisoners in jail with the public defender and the prisoner in jail and the prosecutor and the judge in a different room. I just rail against that because the law isn't a science. It's not black and white. It's about human relationships because the law deals with a subject that's almost completely subjective at some level. It's about human-to-human contact and human-to-human relationships. And this Board of Governors used to meet much more often prior to the 2008 referendum collision, I'll just say. And one of those things is, I think we'll be better at governing with more meetings, more check-ins, more able to do milestones. Right now, it's pretty tight with 6 meetings. People start feeling the pressure. We only have 2 more meetings. September's the last time we have a chance to make a difference. Those of us who are going off the board and stuff like that. If we have more meetings, time to check in, we're going back to what has historically led us to success over 131 years over this Bar Association. Now, when I asked Budget and Audit Committee for funding for 2 more meetings, I didn't say, look, I want us in Crystal Palaces all over the place. By the way, we're going to Vancouver, BC, and Hawaii and Mazatlan. But our bar very responsibly budgets conservatively, meaning they budget liberally. I want us to come way under this budget, and I'm not looking to put us in fancy places. And one of the meetings I've scheduled is in Seattle, But I want us to have more time to have deliberation, to have communications, and I want to go out around the state in combination with the efforts of the member engagement community and the listening tour idea, and let's make that reputation discussion we had, let's make this bog outward facing, and let's make that a part of this. And just as a side note, since we're talking about the magazine also, is the physicality again. I appreciate it when sitting there in the lobby of my office. When it comes in your email, if you don't delete it, and if it doesn't get buried down the email chain, I might open it and I might flip to something, but then it's getting deleted or going down the email chain. When it's sitting in my, and I hate to be crude here, the office bathroom or the lobby, there's a chance to actually feel and understand over the course of the month if I have that magazine what's happening. And I think you're going to see a really interesting experiment that I'm doing with the magazine over this next year, is I'm showcasing what lawyers, members, not necessarily in the WSBA, but groups of lawyers around the state are doing to improve the social fabric of our state. And I hope that that's going to be really interesting and educational for all our members to show the great things lawyers are doing across the state. So I hope you guys will support both of these ideas. I think it's going to help me help you the best.
All right, you want to jump the queue, Dan?
Oh, I'm sorry. If I could.
Okay.
Sorry. One thing, I don't know if I'm going to say this correctly, but if you meet 6 times a year and don't get as much done because we don't have fellowship, but don't get along and don't accomplish anything, that costs a hell of a lot more than having 2 more meetings and getting more done. So it's it's not all about the dollars. I firmly support meeting more and more relaxed and more deliberative.
And we have Tara and then Chris.
I just want to make 2 quick points, and obviously, this is your decision, and I think it's clear where you guys want to go. And I also don't think it's an either or. You don't just do outreach by meeting around the state. And so 2 quick points I wanted to make. One is transparency and the fact that we often cannot, it's not even a matter of money, we often cannot webcast when we were out remotely. And even if we can, it's costly. And so, there is a benefit to being in a place where anybody, anywhere around the state can watch and observe what's going on and engage. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. The other thing, and this is where I say it's not an either or, is that in the civil legal aid context, something that I have learned the lesson time and time again when you're doing outreach is that it is much more meaningful to come to where people are at their events. When we swoop in and expect them to come to us, we are never going to get the same return as if we come to their bar meeting, to their holiday party, to their annual picnic. And so I just think that that's something important to keep in mind. And that's why I do think, that the listening tour type event, I think although it's true that you're not all there and that is a challenge, I think you get a much better human interaction. I think you get people feeling much freer to speak, and you're more likely to be able to schedule it around something that community already cares about, as opposed to we're going to be there on these dates and we need everybody to show up here.
Thanks, Tara. Chris?
I don't concede defeat as easily as Governor Gerbicki. I do favor more meetings in Seattle. I think I've been clear about that because of the webcast option. Obviously, I'm in a particular situation because I think you're all going to keep coming to Olympia no matter what. So I get the benefit of that, and we have the largest turnout when we're in Olympia. We get the most interaction with local lawyers when we're in Olympia, and I expect that to continue. I guess I just want to be clear that this is a $108,000 budget item, and it's all great to say we need to go. We need more outreach. We need to go, but we've been going. We're here in the Tri-Cities. We've been to Yakima. We've been to Bellingham. We've been to Vancouver. We've been to Olympia. We've done all of that without spending an additional $108,000, which is what we're looking at. So I'm not saying we have to totally eliminate our trips to other communities, but what I am saying is that this is a significant expansion in terms of dollars. And as long as we're all aware of it and comfortable with it and feel like we can defend it to the membership, so be it. That's part of our budget decision. But I just want us to be clear that this isn't just about, let's engage in outreach. This is about spending a significant amount of money to engage in outreach that may or may not be beneficial. And I certainly agree with Tara that it's better for us as governors to go to our local bar meetings and meet with the people there and talk with them about what the bar is doing. That is a way cheaper way for us to keep the state bar connected with the membership. Not so much sitting in this room with no one from the community being present. Thanks.
Good point, Chris. Good points. All right. I've got a couple of questions, but anybody else have questions here? I know right now there's like at least 5,000 lawyers east of the Cascades researching to see if PJ's really from Spokane. because the conspiracy theory is you're a plant from Seattle trying to drag this bar back to Seattle, right? But I'll let you know what the finding is in a minute, because they're blowing up my phone here. Okay, couple of comments on the request for more money, and it's a president's request, and I think every president. This is food for thought, please. This is not some dictatorial comment. This is just food for thought. Every president, I'm looking at two that are coming right behind me. They have things they want to accomplish, right? Now we know from experience you don't always accomplish everything you want to accomplish. But sometimes to get the ball rolling, it costs money. One of the things I am charged with is I desired to bring all of us together at more meetings, more conferences, rather than sort of picking and choosing governors based on year. I wanted to open that up for everybody. So I think the invitation was wide open this year for Western states, and there was a lot of squabbling over Hawaii versus some less lavish place. But the reason for that and my purpose for that is I really wanted those outside conferences for all of us so that we could actually have relationship and gel. It was mildly, lukewarmly successful, I think. But it costs money, and it was a cost to the budget. And this board said, you know what, Mr. President, you're the president and you have this vision, and we're going to get behind you. And they did that, and they increased it, and I'm very thankful for that. So the good reason, I think, Chris, if it's a good reason, you can accept it or deny it. Rajiv's, as the president, he's asking for it. And sometimes it's really that simple, and it's because he has a vision that he believes more meetings and different venues will bring us together. We will make better decisions, and we will be more effective for the people that we serve, not just the membership, but the citizens. So I would ask that you just simply consider that. It's a request of the president to meet his goals and vision for what he has out there. Whether you, I mean, the only cautionary tale I would say is I think during my extended term as president, we've probably had more meetings than any past president in a long time. And it's not, but I don't think it's not, because it's not just about meeting, because boy, we know you can meet a lot and not get a lot done. And we know you can meet a lot and not have relationship. And we know you can meet a lot and you can actually be more fractured. So I think the thought, though, is if we head down the right trail, more meetings will mean increased relationship and better services and better decision-making, quite frankly. So that's the one caveat that I would add there. Now, I'll switch gears real quick, and I want to talk back to the budget process. I have sometimes dreams, and sometimes they're nightmares, but these things pop in my head, and I want to ask Dan and Tara, and I'm going to ask the same question when the structures work group folks get up here. So this is a preview when you people get up here. Has anybody really crunched numbers on our budget if the unforeseeable, unthinkable would happen and we received a mandate from the Supreme Court down the road that says, you're not going to think about bifurcating, you're going to bifurcate. And if that were to happen, I know our structures work group, they're going to tell us where they're at on what they're doing, but if that happened to us, and this is a guess, this was part of the dream that I had, and some people would say it'd be a nightmare, is that happened to us. And overnight, we lost about a third of our dues-paying members because they said, we're not going to be a member of this voluntary thing. And because I couldn't quite figure out if that happened to us, how people would say, well, I want to join. I want more of us. So to me, it seems like our numbers go like this, down. And have we done any budget planning or even strategizing what would happen to this organization if we were forced to bifurcate, and what are the projections on what the losses would be in revenue and how would we handle it? Just food for thought if we've done any of that.
I learned a long time ago the best answer sometimes in court is very direct. The answer is no. We made the assumption that it was better to not play with the budget materially being in a time of flux. We assumed that if the court made a change, they wouldn't just pull the rug out from underneath us. And so rather than spend a lot of staff time coming up with hypotheticals, we just tried to maintain status quo. And that was a conscious decision at the beginning of the year.
And I think that's a perfectly acceptable answer. I just wanted to make sure that we we're consciously, and that's what I appreciate, is it's a conscious decision. Paul?
And I just want to jump in as someone who's served on the structure work group with a couple of my colleagues around the table here, that there were a lot of different perspectives on the structure work group, and there was very little interest in bifurcation across the board. There were maybe 2 members of the structure work group, I think out of 13? Is that the number? That seem to lean toward bifurcation. We're going to get a draft report from the court that we then recommend to the court. I think that's the process that we're in right now, which is kind of unusual. When we finished up all of our deliberations, I would say there's 0 chance of bifurcation anytime in the near foreseeable future. What there might be, potentially, are sort of Keller-like opt-in options, and that will really depend on what's in this final report. There's a lot of uncertainty around that, but like someone could opt in for the magazine, or someone could opt in for other legislative activities, for example. So I don't think anything about the structure work group is probably going to have a material impact on budgeting, but we'll know in the coming months.
And I'm gonna, thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. I do not want us to divert into the structures work group, because there is a separate time. But if it's related to budget, Pakal, for sure.
It's just a quick comment. I just want to clarify that the structures work group wasn't thinking about what we thought or what we had an interest in. It was hearing from the experts, and we'll go into this more when we come to that, but it was a deliberative process of hearing from experts in the industry and what they thought might happen. And so we'll discuss that further later.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else around the table? Questions for our budget and audit folks? Dan? Tara? Okay. I'm not seeing anybody. Let me just say, no, Tara, or were you just saying wrap this up, please? A clarification. All right, yes. Okay. I was about to wrap it up. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right, well, there are 2 other items on the agenda. They are not for action. They're for discussion, so I'll go quickly. The first is a change to the fiscal policy. For at least 5 years or so, we very carefully track the unique cost of a cost center within that cost center. So let's again land on triple LTs. We always have to go through the exercise of allocating FTEs, sharing them between departments, but we do that across the budget already anyway. For reasons that were never entirely clear to me, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, they changed operations changed the way we track some of the cost centers, again, most notably triple LTs, and put some of those trackable costs to that program within the greater budget. Now, I understand the analysis, and I'm not trying to say it's frivolous. The concept was, well, we're all one big happy family now, and licensing's licensing, and these things are all, the same. But the issue is, there are times where we can easily allocate out different cost centers and see how much a particular program is costing. And there are some of these, especially the court boards, where we like to know what they cost us, and not reflecting the full cost that could be reflected in there. I think it makes our budget less transparent. I mean, I think it is a material change. The first year we changed it, we put an asterisk at the bottom of the budget saying, we've broken this out, but these other numbers that go into this cost can be, given upon request. This year when the budget was rolled out, there was no asterisk. So, I mean, there's a long progression over time where people later don't realize, looking at that cost center, there's all these other costs that are going into that cost center because they're no longer tracked in that cost center. And so this proposal basically requires, as a matter of fiscal policy, to track them all. Now, with our new direction, I was very pleased that staff said, well, if you want it, great. That was different than what I was heard at the beginning of the year, was that, no, you can't do that without the board voting on it, because that's an operations decision we've decided. It seems to me if it's something we want as a board, we ought to just put it in the fiscal policy, and that way there's no confusion about it with some other prior or subsequent board. So that's the first point for first read, not for action.
Any questions on that, governors? Paul?
Just quickly, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on this, but when you talk about allocations, one that has always been near and dear to my heart are the allocations against sections. I've always had the sense that they're over-allocated expenses that they don't benefit from. They have no relationship to them. One ask that I would put to the Finance Committee is to look into that and address that, because there's long been this statement, this mantra that the members are subsidizing the sections. I don't believe it. I've never believed it. I don't believe the allocations. I think they're overbroad and sweeping. I would like them to be tightened up so that we can stop saying, or be very accurate in saying that the members are subsidizing the sections.
That's a good point, and that's something for next year. We don't have time to deal with that. It's not. I agree with you. Well, I agree with the concept. I'm not saying I'd like to know more about the facts, but one of the things we talked about in budget and audit is whether to raise the section's dues. And one of the problems we had in terms of our cycle, this is the time we talk about it, but they're already making their budgets now. And so to hit them with a dues increase is really unfair to the sections because they haven't had time to work that into their budgets. So, Paul, I would really urge you, especially if you're on budget and audit next year, to bring that up. The data's there. Look at see if you want to increase the fees. One of the things that I think would be helpful, although Alec disagrees with me, I think a little bit in the application is, if we can give the sections more freedom by making them, increasing their fees, we can say, look, there's no member fees going to it all. Now we don't have a Keller issue or anything like that. That's something that I think would be helpful. It might be something the sections would like to pay an extra couple of dollars for, to have that freedom. There's another side of the coin, though, and Alec will remind you guys of it next year, but it's just something else to keep in mind.
So PJ and Alec actually just said they wanted to defer to our speaker at the microphone. So Laura, come forward, because there's actually somebody in the audience that wants to have the mic, which is wonderful. Did you get it?
Okay, good morning. My name is Laura Bradley. I'm an Assistant Chief Industrial Appeals Judge at the Board of Industrial Insurance Appeals. I'm that agency's liaison to this Board of Governors, as well as the Access to Justice Board liaison to the Board of Governors. Governor Bridges, I noticed in the materials a letter to Justice Fairhurst regarding the LLT program. And as a member of the Access to Justice Board, I firmly and strongly believe that that's a program that does increase access to justice. But my question to you is, did you consult with the governors before you sent that letter to Justice Fairhurst, and how did that letter come about?
Well, the treasurer is an officer. The treasurer has certain duties, one of which is reporting. So no, I got some input from few people for some help.
Wait, can you speak up, Dan? I don't think I heard you.
I said the treasurer is an officer. I have an independent office aside from my governorship. I have a duty to report out. I got some input from various governors, just, hey, what do you think? But that was my report, and I stand by it.
Thank you for the answer.
Thanks, Laura. All
Which
right.
governors did you talk to?
Well, hold on. Is that Ethan?
Yes.
Okay, Ethan. Let me put you in the queue. We're gonna take Nancy's up at that microphone, and then we're gonna come back to PJ, Alec, and then Ethan. Please remember that order. Nancy.
I guess I wanted to endorse Paul's question or comment that sections want to have a say in the number that's thrown around about the per member charge, because we don't use the office in the same way that others do. We don't use staff in the same way that others do, and for the most part, at least our section feels that we are charged far more than we use. The entire idea that section dues or the per member charge might increase and give us even fewer dollars of our section dues would not be well received by our section, nor by most, if not all, sections. The other point, and I've raised it already with Kevin and Tara, is the new split on CLE dollars, and wanting to see that reflected specifically in the budget materials, And I think we kind of compromised that, I guess if one footnote's been removed, we'll throw another one in, which is something to say that, and people may not understand that under the new CLE section split, we're supposed to be receiving some share of products sold from our mid-year of 2018, but we're not going to get that money till 2020. And there's certainly a certain level of suspicion, paranoia, whatever, that we'll never see that money because it's not reflected anywhere. And not to say we don't trust everything Kevin's told us, because we do, but it would be great to see that figure, and I think we've settled on having a dollar figure there. The idea that our budgets were due in mid-July was also a problem, especially when the budget material sent out said, oh, and by the way, you're going to get information about the per member charge, but it's going to be after you submit your budgets. It was poorly drafted. I don't know how that happened, but we do need the information. We need to be able to, just as you're spending some of your reserves, we need the opportunity to spend some of our reserves. We want clarity about what we sort of have in the bank as well. But please don't do anything that affect sections without talking to the sections, and give us more time to do things. Because remember, we have to have meetings too. We need advance notice for our meetings. Our Family Law Executive Committee needed time to work on its budget for you. But we need the materials and time to do that. And otherwise we're in a position of trying to decide things via email, and we all know that's not what we're supposed to be doing. So please don't make any decisions about sections without us having a meaningful opportunity to talk to you about them, rather than sort of comment on a decision that maybe has already been made.
Thanks, Nancy. I actually attribute the phrase trust but verify to you. And I appreciate it. All right, there's more questions here. We have people in a queue, but I also have a courtesy request that we take a short break here so that people can stretch their legs and do other things that they need to do. So let's take a let's make it a 10-minute rest stop here, and then we're back. 10 minutes.